Welcome everybody, and we thank you for joining us for this new perspective series on the science of living. And of course, as always, we welcome HP, the founder and chancellor of our university in Surat, India, and our benefactor, the Lagraj Sri Aurobindo Center here in Fountain Inn, as well as our sister center, Sri Aurobindo Center in Surat, India. And we also welcome members of the faculty at our university. I see Professor Joshi and others coming on. We appreciate you following this series on the science of living with us and for joining and participating in many of the new perspective sessions. So today, our guest speaker is Santosh Krinsky, who will address the topic, the role of the individual spiritual aspirant in the process of the evolution of consciousness. And Santosh states, Sri Aurobindo and the mother have radically redefined the objective of yoga and the role and destiny of the individual. And for those of you who follow Cultural Integration Fellowship Sunday Zoom meetings, back in early August, CIF hosted Santosh, who gave an illuminating talk on a related subject. But for today, he says he has further developed the topic, adding a new focus, direction, and additional insights. So we welcome you, Santosh. We are always so interested in hearing your perspectives on such important topics. And of course, joining us from Hawaii, we are especially appreciative of you joining at 4 a.m. your time. Santosh was just mentioning that he actually was up by 2 or 3 this morning and working on podcasts and a few other things that he does on a daily basis, which we'll be mentioning here in a minute. So welcome, Santosh. So Santosh has been studying Sri Aurobindo's writings since 1971, and many of you know him through his daily blog, which I'll be posting in the chat, and his podcast. Also, I'll be posting the URL in the chat. He is a prolific author of 21 books and editor-in-chief at Lotus Press, which carries many of Sri Aurobindo and the mother's books. The US editions and links to ebooks of Sri Aurobindo's writings can be found at lotuspress.com. And he is also president of the Institute for Holistic Education in Hawaii, which is a nonprofit focused on integrating spirituality into daily life. So once again, we welcome you and we welcome all attendees. There will certainly be time for comments and questions and dialogue with Santosh towards the end. In the meantime, if you want to post any comments or questions in the chat, and we'll get to them towards the end. But at this time, I'd like to go ahead and hand it over to you, Santosh.
Namaste. Om Tat Savitur Varam Rupam Jyoti Parasya Dhimahi Yanna Satyena Dhipayet. So welcome everybody. It is so wonderful to have an opportunity to share satsang with devotees from around the world. Today, the subject is going to be an interesting one for most people. It's about us, you and me, what we're here for, what our destiny is, what our role to play is, alive here on the planet Earth. So where we are at present, where we're going in the future, and what we can do as part of that process that Sri Aurobindo and the mother have so wonderfully described to us. Before we do that, I'd like to go into a little bit what I would call, with all deference to Stephen Hawking, a brief history of time. But I'm not going to go back to the Big Bang or before that. Let's start with the planet Earth. And so Uh, we'll discuss that, and we'll take this voyage that Sri Aurobindo describes in Savitri, and I'll read a very brief passage. This is the sailor on the flow of time. This is world matter's slow discoverer, who, launched into this small corporeal birth, has learned his craft in tiny bays of self, but dares at last unplumbed infinitudes, a voyager upon eternity's seas. So scientists tell us that the age of the Earth is somewhere around 4.5 billion years. And I'd like to go through a little bit of this history. I'm going to skip a few steps, uh, but I think it's important for us to recognize uh, what evolutionary time is, because we as human beings, we have a lifetime of 70 or 80 or 90 or maybe even 100 years. And we think that's a long time, or maybe sometimes we think it's a short time. But either way, um, it's not even the blink of an eye in evolutionary time. And I think that sets a context for us of why and how we respond to things. So if the age of the Earth is 4.5 billion years, and we look at the first evidence of land on life is like 3.2 billion years ago. Uh, this is the, the first sign that the vital force has evolved out of matter. And following Sri Aurobindo's understanding that um, everything in existence is not some kind of a random chance. And we look at the universe, we look at the world and the planet and the diversity and the energies at play. Can we really say that this is just some kind of a mistake? Um, if we want to build a building and we look at uh, dumping a whole bunch of materials on the ground in a certain place, the building does not build itself. It's not a matter of matter getting together and saying, let's put up a building, uh, or it just being some kind of random chance. Someone has to design the building, someone has to organize the steps involved in it, and the accumulation of materials and the proper use of forms to create that building. Well, the whole universe is the building within which consciousness exists, and it's created by consciousness. And so, as Sri Aurobindo points out, consciousness is involved in matter and has basically designed the evolution, not that consciousness follows material development, but that consciousness creates the forms it needs to express itself. So the first signs of life 3.2 billion years ago, okay? About 2 billion years ago, the next evolutionary step in the process takes place with the development of what are called eukaryotic cells. And these are cells that have internal systems that allow the development of uh, energy engines within the cells, uh, chloroplasts for the conversion of solar energy into life energy, um, sexual reproduction. Uh, this is what eukaryotic cells allow. Before that time, life was basically single cellular. Um, about 1.5 billion years ago, these eukaryotic cells split into the ancestors of what we now know as plants, fungi, and animals. This is 500 million years after the first signs of life or the development of the eukaryotic cell. So we can begin to see what the yoga of nature that Sri Aurobindo describes at various places involves in terms of a time frame. Uh, the time frames in human lifespans are enormous. And about 890 million years ago, the first recognizable animals appeared. And then it took another 335 million years before animals were able to show their own power of impulsion. In other words, they could walk, they could fly, whatever it is that they did for impulsion. All of these time frames, uh, I think we can see there's a sort of a pattern here. The first steps of conversion of pure matter, material form into life forms took billions of years. Now, the next steps of the progression of animal consciousness, uh, the vital force making itself felt, didn't take billions of years, it took hundreds of millions of years. And we now move to the rise of the dinosaurs, which is 250 million years ago. And they ruled the earth until about 66 million years ago. So they were here for a long time. Um, the early primates came about just 55 million years ago. I say just, but in our frame, this is a long time. Um, the higher primates, 40 million years ago. And about 2 to 2.8 million years ago, the human genus came forward, which you could say represents a next phase in the development of the vital and then the mental consciousness. And uh, the modern human species appeared about 300,000 years ago, which is 2 million years later. We still share 98.4% of the genes of the chimpanzee, even after millions of years of evolutionary divergence. That's how humanity has been built upon prior development of, uh, you might call the evolution of forms that are based on the evolution of consciousness. Human domination of the planet means the control of our mental beings, changing life and matter consciously, uh, is only 11,000 years. It may seem longer than that with what we're doing to the planet. Uh, and in fact, some scientists say we're engaged right now in the sixth mass extinction event, uh, the one that follows the demise of the dinosaurs, mainly because of the imbalances that our development of the mental consciousness have caused in planetary life. And a lot of that is based on uh, the ego, and we'll talk about that later. But every one of these major transitions led to the development of forms that could hold and manifest the next evolution of consciousness. And that's, I think, an important point to think about when Sri Aurobindo and the mother talk about the evolution of consciousness. Uh, they're looking at this scale of evolutionary time, what they call the yoga of nature. And they have pointed out repeatedly that with the yoga of nature, this next phase, that what we would call the supramental consciousness, this next phase could take, who knows, hundreds of thousands of years. Uh, if we're sort of truncating the time scale down from billions of years to hundreds of millions of years to millions of years, We may be now in the hundreds of thousands of years. And they look at it and say, well, the imbalances that are caused by the mental consciousness being essentially unchecked in the ego development create that crisis that requires something more and something faster. And that's why they develop what we call the integral yoga, not to lead to cessation of life or escape from life or individual liberation or entry into nirvana. And you know, in the Buddhist tradition, there is a concept called bodhisattva. And bodhisattva basically is an individual who has carried out a spiritual development to such a point that that individual can go and create for himself liberation from this entire sequence of life. But he turns back and says that until every last sentient being achieves nirvana, he won't enter in. Now, the concept here is that it's not about an individual achieving something as an egoistic personality, but about the need for the entire sentient universe to achieve that liberation. Now, Sri Aurobindo and the mother don't talk about liberation as being the goal or the end purpose of our existence. They talk about the transformation of life in the earth consciousness. So while the bodhisattva vow of every sentient being points away for us, it doesn't point away from the earth, it points away into the integral yoga. We look at, if you will, uh, our own position in that. And Sri Aurobindo and the mother want us to understand that it's not about us. And this is a really hard concept because we are so wrapped up in our mental and vital consciousness. We're born into this, we're educated into this, and we think it's about me, me, me. And we're going to achieve something. I've heard people say that they're devotees and they expect to be supramentalized in this lifetime. And, you know, maybe, I don't know, miracles can happen, but that's not the process of nature. Um, I'd like to read a brief citation from Sri Aurobindo about this subject. What we are doing, if and when we succeed, will be a beginning, not a completion. It is the foundation of a new consciousness on earth, a consciousness with infinite possibilities of manifestation. The eternal progression is in the manifestation, and beyond it, there is no progression. And he goes on to say that the old yogas, the original yogas, didn't believe in this transformation. That wasn't their goal. Uh, they think that life is an illusion. They want to escape the illusion to the reality. So uh, essentially, uh, it is only some yogas that aim at a transformation of any kind, except that of ignorance into knowledge. And it is not intended to supramentalize humanity at large, but to establish the principle of the supramental consciousness in the Earth evolution. And he goes on to say, uh, it would not be possible to change all that in a moment. We have always said that the whole of humanity will not change the moment there is the descent. But what can be done is to establish the higher principle in the earth consciousness in such a way that it will remain and go on strengthening and spreading itself in the earth life. That is how a new principle in the evolution must necessarily work. This transformation cannot be done individually in a solitary way only. No individual solitary transformation, apart from the work for the earth, which means more than any individual transformation, would be either possible or useful. Also, no individual human being can, by his own power alone, work out the transformation, nor is it the object of the yoga to create an individual Superman here and there. The object of the yoga is to bring down the supramental consciousness on earth, to fix it there, to create a new race with the principle of the supramental consciousness governing the inner and outer individual and collective life. So let's reflect on this for a moment. If it's not about creating individual salvation, and it's not about creating an individual Superman, as he describes here, but it's about every one of us dedicating our lives as the Bodhisattva dedicates his life to the creation of that new power of consciousness within the earth nature. And this is really the crux of it. It's not about you, it's not about me, it's not about any one of us. Now, somewhere, and don't quote me on this, but somewhere Sri Aurobindo, as I recall, said that it could take 300 or 400 years for the new race to emerge. And that would be based upon more or less the intensity of the effort combined with working out and overcoming the resistance of the existing egoistic nature, if you will, or the resistance of matter and the embedded instincts and habits of the vital life. All of these things have to be modified. It's something that I call the texturing of the consciousness of the earth. The idea that you can't have a unicorn appear, if you will, in sort of today's modern business sense, without there being a basis in the society for that form to survive and thrive. And so the development of an individual supramental being or a collective group of supramental beings is conditioned upon not just the emergence of that consciousness, but the development of enough texturing across the entire physical, vital, mental sphere that it can support that. So, where are we? The human being has its own issues. We are struggling to address those issues. And any one of us in our lifetimes is likely not going to be transformed and supramentalized. I look at this as something like a relay race. only the last runner in the relay race gets across the finish line. All the others are just running to move things forward. Now, if we look at it as, let's accept Sri Aurobindo's number 300 to 400 years, we're looking at maybe 10 generations of humanity before the first supramental beings that can actually manifest and live that consciousness uh, are able to actually walk upon the earth or whatever they do. They may not walk, who knows? Um, the rest of us are basically carrying that baton forward through 10 generations, uh, where what we're doing is helping to texture the consciousness and prepare the ground, but not ourselves individually getting the immediate fruits of that. Now, let's say that if we take repeated births and we continue this process through our psychic association through time, uh, our future psychic heirs of rebirth uh, will be the ones to get the benefit of that. So maybe we're thinking like the Native Americans do about 7 generations down and what the impact on that is all going to be. So if our goal is for immediate transformation, with all due respect, I think that we're not focused on where we need to be. What can we do? Um, nature's methods, if you will, are to combine benefits from other aspects that have been developed to more or less create a new way forward. And as an example, the energy centers in the human body are called mitochondria. They're within the cells. And the mitochondria actually developed from a bacteria that uh, invaded the cell. And instead of the immune system destroying it and the bacteria creating a disease, they created a symbiotic relationship whereby the bacteria thrive and get fed by the human system, and they provide energy back to the system. And we look also at our digestive system. Everyone, I'm sure, is aware of what we call probiotics. These are what we call the good bacteria that reside in our guts that actually carry out a huge portion of the digestive process, without which we would really be struggling. And so, looking at this, we say that, well, what is the human being? We are a collective of various pieces of natural evolution to create a certain forward motion or movement, a certain form that works for what needs to be done. The collective power of this effort, even if it's not for our own individual transformation, but to texture consciousness, also comes within a context. In 1956, the mother declared that the supramental descent had occurred in matter. And I suspect that it's not only active, it's very active. But it's active at ways that we don't recognize. And we don't recognize it because we don't observe the way nature works. Uh, the supramental process is to open up what we would call a truth consciousness. And what has happened in the last 75 years or so is evidence of that. You've got all kinds of new revelations coming about how humanity is dealing with the planet, with the environment, with each other. All kinds of corruption have been exposed. All kinds of issues have been brought forward into the light that used to remain hidden. And the forces that oppose, that have a vested egoistic interest, a vested long-term embedded habitual interest in not changing and not allowing this to occur because their power in their minds would be reduced or eliminated. These forces are up in arms worldwide. Everywhere, things are exploding. Forces are fighting. Oppression is happening. Economic controls and manipulations are stronger than ever. Technologies are being developed to basically monitor and control everybody with the idea that somehow brute force of the ego can suppress a movement of evolutionary time, the development of the next phase of consciousness. It is the very fact that these things are so prevalent and so heavily visible today that tells us that a new force is working that's irritating these established forces very, very much. And so I see the opposition arising as the most obvious sign of the evolution of the next phase of consciousness fixed into the earth consciousness. Now, how long is this going to take? It might take several hundred years for this opposition to get worked out, but it will get worked out. And the reason is that souls that have adhered to this concept are taking conscious birth on the planet. And that itself is a marvelous, amazing thing, and we can see it. In Savitri, Sri Aurobindo inspires us with his vision of the individual and the transformation process. And so I'll close with that. I saw the omnipotence flaming pioneers over the heavenly verge, which turns towards life, come crowding down the amber stairs of birth, forerunners of a divine multitude. Out of the paths of the morning star they came, into the little room of mortal life. I saw them cross the twilight of an age, the sun-eyed children of a marvelous dawn, the great creators with wide brows of calm, the massive barrier breakers of the world, and wrestlers with destiny in her lists of will, the laborers in the quarries of the gods, the messengers of the incommunicable, the architects of immortality. Into the fallen human sphere they came, faces that wore the immortal's glory still, voices that commune still with the thoughts of God, bodies made beautiful by the Spirit's light, carrying the magic word, the mystic fire, carrying the Dionysian cup of joy, approaching eyes of a diviner man, lips chanting an unknown anthem of the soul, feet echoing in the corridors of time, high priests of wisdom, sweetness, might, and bliss, discoverers of beauty's sunlit ways and swimmers of love's laughing fiery floods, and dancers within rapture's golden doors, their tread one day shall change the suffering earth and justify the light on nature's face.
Thank you, Santosh, so much. And this is beautiful, especially this ending actually defines everything what you wanted to say. So basically, your message is that individual here is to help nature to evolve to the higher levels. We are here the helpers of nature's yoga and not here to egoistically try to develop ourselves against nature or against the whole world, just as if we are the supreme beings. This is that wrong Superman idea of Nietzsche, most probably, which was mistaken for Sri Aurobindo's ideal. And of
And
course, yes,
I
go ahead.
should mention one thing in relation to that, and that is that people want to have spiritual experiences, they want to have illumination. But what if the role of some people is to have that experience as part of this process, and the role of other people is to really just deal with the stuff? In a poem called A God's Labor, Sri Aurobindo points out, I have been digging deep and long in a horror of filth and mire, a bed for the golden river song, a home for the deathless fire. Well, this isn't spiritual illumination on the heights. This is dealing with all those movements, the anger, the ego, the pride, the vanity, the lust, the greed, the egoistic self-dealing that are part of what needs to be textured. What if some of us are just there to deal with that stuff? And we're not here to personally experience the heights other than possibly glimpses to give us hope. It's really a different way of looking at things. And some people get discouraged by that.
Mm.
But some people say, well, okay, let's roll up our sleeves. And if Sri Aurobindo can dig deep and long in a horror of filth and mire, well, I guess we can sign up for that too, if necessary.
Absolutely. I understand what you mean. I had once experience, I remember in Soviet Union, looking at two drunken men digging the trench and, and cursing. And I was thinking, how is that the divine created this, this formation? Why it is there? What it is for? Uh, Usually we condemn these people. And then I thought, no, it's not like that. They are actually going deep into the darkness with their small lights, but those lights inside them are actually transmitting the greater light into the darkness. They are intermediaries who dared to go down, to forget themselves, to be lost in the darkness. And that is the greatest sacrifice. And it reminded me of this statement of Jesus, those who are the last will be the first in the kingdom of my Father. So there's something mysterious about this manifestation of the Supreme in the human race. And I understand what you want to say. This is amazing. Thank you so much. Beautiful. If anyone wants to say something or reflect upon this or have questions, please, please, it's time now.
Just to add what Santosh has so eloquently laid out the evolutionary journey of human being, I think what Sri Aurobindo has brought out and Mother has given away is that we have to be conscious collaborator in that evolutionary journey of ours to make the room for supramental to work with us. So we have to be conscious collaborator with it. And that's how we can keep moving forward. And that will help also hasten the evolutionary process and manifestation of supramental being, actually, because we have to be part of that evolutionary process.
Mm. And in the Basis of Yoga, which is the current blog post, we just went over sort of this subject. Sri Aurobindo advises someone, you spend too much time focused on all your deficiencies and problems and everything. The real work is to aspire and be receptive and accept the grace and the force as it enters, because it's the yoga of nature that we're facilitating, not an individual achievement. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. Poonam, you wanted to say something?
Oh,
yeah.
okay, I'll wait.
Yeah, I just wanted to, when Santosh mentioned about the probiotic.
You went muted.
Sorry, I accidentally muted you. I was trying to get your hand down. Sorry, Pruna, you'll have to unmute yourself.
I'm doing it, yeah. So no, Santosh had said that, talked about the probiotic which are in nuggets. So I remember reading in one of the journals that there are millions of good bacteria in the large intestines particularly, which keeps, which fights all the diseases. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yes, please, Radha, you wanted to add.
Oh, yes, I was just going to comment. First of all, thank you so much, Santosh. That was absolutely excellent and explained and illustrated some very important concepts in terms of our evolution and the supramental power and consciousness. You had mentioned that, we don't really know or understand how nature works. We can't really see and appreciate it all the time. And when you were commenting that the supramental has already come down and touched the earth and working in the earth, nature, it reminds me that a lot of what we're seeing, not just the wars, but the other destructions that we're seeing with the natural elements, the fire and the tornadoes and the hurricanes, this is churning, perhaps, that Mother Nature is doing under the impetus of the supramental in order to begin to create or awaken even the consciousness, the consciousness within matter or within nature. So just wanted to share that thought and get your comments on it.
Well, I think that's very good. I believe that if all of us reflect on what we see and what we experience, both in terms of what we're seeing outside with all this churning you're mentioning, and also the very hopeful signs, the light, the people awakening, and the vast increase of people interested in yoga and spirituality. And I mean, all these things work together to show that there is both the positive, if you will, side of that process of awakening consciousness, and on the other side, what you might call the negative side, the opening up and churning, as you mention it, of the material world, the vital world, and the mental world that has ruled the earth heretofore.
So basically, we are all here workers only in different niches of we have different tasks. Some of us are the workers without wages for delight. Others are closer to the more conscious kind of evolution, or to say, at least ascribe themselves for that, thinking that they are that. But truly speaking, we are all working for one particular reason: to go forward, to move forward. Those who resist, they also resist for the reason. They intensify the divine intervention and also highlight all those problems which have to be dealt with. You mentioned in this beautiful quotation, the resistance. We have to face the resistance also. and not only to promote forward, but to meet the resistance, to face it, to deal with it. And many of us are dealing with it. And of course, we do not speak of them highly, of those people who are in the trouble and dealing with resistance, but they are workers of this evolution. This is a beautiful image, which includes everyone in this journey. Thank you. Sangeeta, you wanted to say something?
I just want to apologize. My Wi-Fi is not amazing. That's why I'm not opening my video. I really wanted to thank Santosh, and always I'm very grateful to Lagras. Thank you, Vladimir and Rade. Santosh, I completely resonate with what you're saying, and we are actually on very similar paths because the work that I'm doing right now is very much aligned with what you've described of helping and facilitating the supramental to connect more deeply with nature. I was just going to request you, if you're amenable to it, to share your email contact, if that's possible. I would like to reach out and connect with you, please.
Sure. It's Santosh K at msn.com.
Okay, thank you. santoshk@msn.com.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
I've also put out there Santosh's blog and his YouTube in the chat for those that want to follow.
Thank you, Rade.
Once, since nobody speaks, once I was puzzled by Mother's statement when they came to her and said, you know, this person is not really for integral yoga here, and why do you keep him, you know, and his family in the ashram? And she said, but you know, he is a very good worker. And this is the quality needed for the constellation of all, you know, engagements of all different kinds. One of them has to be a good worker to cover something very basic, yeah, for the rest of moving forward. It's amazing if you think of it. Yeah. No more judgment of who is spiritual, who is not. And you remember there was one American who lived on the island, most probably you know him, I forgot his name, who was drunken always and under the drugs and so on. And people resisted and said, why do you keep him here? He is not really for the ashram. And she says, he took onto himself the vulgarity of American people. The whole vulgarity he took onto himself, it was his yoga. And this is something amazing to think. It's really something. Only Mother can see what is really happening. Yeah, we can't see. We do not know.
Well, the texturing of consciousness has to happen at every level. So whether people are consciously doing it, whether they're moved unconsciously, or whether they're simply progressing along the path of the yoga of nature, every sentient being on the planet is involved in this process somehow. And, you know, we all talk about, oh, the ego is bad and we need to get rid of the ego. And Sri Aurobindo said, the ego is the helper, the ego is the bar. And there is actually a role for the ego. And we shouldn't minimize that. It becomes, for us, and this is part of the process of what we can do, okay? It becomes an opportunity for nature to create a self-aware and conscious receiving device and nexus, if you will, so that when people get to that stage, they can begin to tune their focus towards the higher energy centers and bring down and radiate that force consciously. And until that was there, you had this amorphous energy moving through almost like instinctively. So now you've got self-conscious individuals, such as those of us who participate in these type of programs, whose job it is really to tune ourselves to the higher vibrational centers and to let that force work through us. It's not that we're doing the yoga, it's that the yoga is doing us. And the ego provided the platform for that to even start to occur.
Or to face resistance.
Exactly.
Right. Sangeeta wants to say something. Your hand is up.
I just want to comment that, you know, the indigenous peoples all over the world, I believe through their ceremonies, are actually doing this, and they've been doing it right since the beginning. And even I feel that with the Indian indigenous systems of Havan and all the Ayurvedic, ceremonies and rituals, that is also being used to bring in the supramental consciousness into the earth. And it was always like that, probably from the beginning.
That's what Santosh was showing us, that the whole design was from the beginning. You cannot build the foundation for the building which is not coming. So, absolutely. Thank you. Somebody else? I see many faces, many familiar faces. Sharon, Kinshuk, who wants to add to it? Rick, please go ahead.
I'm reminded of a writing in Adventure of Consciousness by Satsang, wherein he describes that in 1926, as the overmind descended, the sadhaks in the ashram were disrupted. And I draw a parallel to today's situation, where we see the world perhaps in chaos and increasing disruption following the descent of the supermind in 1956. Just that parallel.
Wonderful.
You know, maybe again, since nobody's raised their hand, I'll share something here that I was just looking for. I read recently, and it kind of goes back to your comment, Santosh, about nature and how nature works. And there was a writing that was published in the ARIA back in, I think, 2015, 1970 by Sri Aurobindo. And what he was doing was really taking the Darwin, the Western concept of evolution, and point by point by point, discussing how there is truth in each, but those truths are subordinate to a larger truth. And one of those points that he was mentioning was that it looks to us, as we look back over time, that evolution is taking place very slow, very steady. He says very minute graduations. But then, and I'll read this, it's a little lengthy, but I think it's absolutely on point. He says now evolution suggested, instead of slow, steady, minute graduations, right? It is now new steps in evolutions are rather affected by rapid and sudden outbreaks, as it were, of manifestation from the unmanifest. Shall we say that nature, preparing slowly behind the veil, working a little backwards, working a little forwards, one day arrives at the combination of outward things which makes it possible for her to throw her new idea into a realized formation, suddenly, with violence, with a glorious dawning, with a grandiose stride. And that would explain the economy of her relapses and her reappearances of things long dead. She aims at a certain immediate result, and to arrive at it more quickly and entirely, she sacrifices many of her manifestations and throws them back into the latent, the unmanifest, the subconscient. But she has not finished with them. She will need them at another stage for a further result. Therefore, she brings them forward again, and they reappear in new forms and other combinations and act towards new ends. And so evolution advances. And so we don't see actually what nature is doing, and we don't think of it as these sudden outbursts, as these violent reactions that are happening, but this is actually the birthing and the opportunity for new forms and new consciousness to come forward. So I thought it was just absolutely beautiful when I read that a few days ago. And I think anyone who is interested in, Sri Aurobindo's other concepts of evolution, I would encourage you to read that, which is now in a little pamphlet.
And actually, Sri Aurobindo elsewhere talks about the evolutionary saltus, where things get prepared to a certain stage, and then there's like a sudden jump or leap that occurs because it's all been prepared, as you're pointing out here.
Absolutely. Yeah, amazing, huh? Absolutely amazing.
There is the whole passage in Savitri, and believe shall be naught till the work is done. Yeah?
Mm.
So there's something about the sudden appearance or manifestation of which will take. In Auroville, we all believed that it will come suddenly. So we don't have to do much for it. We just have to follow the trend, and then it will come. In spite of us, rather than with our help or something. Yes, Vishal, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just what's that game? Mother says that, and I'm just quoting her, there are people who love adventure. It is these I call, and I tell them this, I invite you to the great adventure. It is not a question of repeating spiritually what others have done before us, for our adventure begins beyond that. It is a question of a new creation, entirely new, with all the unforeseen events, the risks, the hazards, entails. A real adventure whose goal is certain victory, but the road to which is unknown and must be traced out step by step in the unexplored. This is so beautiful because we are all connected. She has called us and we have chosen to participate. So not, I think, as was mentioned from an egotistical standpoint, but just the joy of participating, I think, is so tremendous. And then I think the other thought was, and Mother also says that, it is through the heart, right? Not through the head that you become closer to this force. So that I just want to share.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say something. I loved the image of passing the baton and carrying the baton, knowing that you'll never cross the finish line. And it just brought up deep gratitude for all the people that have passed the baton to me.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
Yeah, I think we have all been so moved today, as Sharon and all of us, Santosh, for what you've shared and what others have shared here today. So we just thank you very, very much for this session and satsang, as you called it, when you were opening. It was very wonderful that we could all come together and share in our thoughts and our ideas, and continue to carry the torch, if you will, for the integral yoga and for progress. So thank you so much. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.